hugely important breaking news.
Yep.
The courts have revealed that Chris Kaba, he was the man who was shot dead by the police officer who was cleared of murder yesterday, was a core member of one of London's most dangerous gangs. He was accused of being involved in 2 shootings in less than a week before he was killed by a police marksman.
This comes as Metropolitan Police Firearms Officer Martin Blake has been cleared of the murder of Chris Kaba, who was fatally shot in South East London on the 5th of September 2022. The family of Mr Kaba have said they have been left with a deep sense of injustice.
Now, Kaba, according to the reports coming out of court, he had previous gang links, previous convictions, a violent past, and the gang was called 67. It's what you call an infamous gang. Brixton Hill-based 67 gang linked by the police to shootings, stabbings and murders. Let's get the latest from our very own Charlie Peters, who's been at the Old Bailey. Charlie, this is important breaking news about Chris Kaba.
Yes, it is, Andrew. A significant update in this story now, as all the reporting restrictions have been lifted, and we can now report for the first time that Chris Kaba was a core member of one of London's deadliest gangs at the time that he was shot by Sergeant Martin Blake in September 2022. Now, Chris Kaba was involved, it's alleged, in a shooting at a nightclub in East London, in Hackney, on the night of August the 29th. Where 4 men were later put on trial and found guilty of a range of offences. But the alleged gunman in that trial, Chris Kaba, was dead. He'd been shot by Martin Blake about 7 or 8 days later on the 5th of September. Now, the 6-7 gang that he was part of is a drill rap group. It was based in the Brixton Hill area, and it had several notorious feuds with other gangs in the Lambeth neighbourhood. It was linked to a key rivalry with the Clapton gang, which is based around the Clapham High Road. Several stabbings were linked to that group during a bitter feud in 2020. It was also linked to another rivalry with a group on the Wandsworth Road, which is further north in the Lambeth neighbourhood, going towards Vauxhall. So the crime pattern of the 6-7 gang spanned across South London, terrorising so many local communities, and we can now reveal that Chris Kaba was a core member of that gang, linked also to that shooting in August of 2022, where one man was shot in the legs several times outside the nightclub. He was first shot inside the Oval Space nightclub on that night, with the weapon being smuggled in by one of the members who was formerly worked there and had worked out a way to navigate the security. Chris Kaba also had several other indictments on his previous charges, possession of a firearm. He was sent to a Young Offenders Institute after being found guilty at Snaresbrook Crown Court. He was released in 2021, but as we've said, several crimes from Chris Kaba's criminal past can now be revealed, and I'll have more details later today.
All right, that's Charlie Peters at the Old Bailey. Well, let's go straight to Harry Miller, who is the founder of Fair Cop. Harry Miller, I think you're abreast of what we've just been hearing from the courts. The reporting restrictions have been lifted. This was a man with serious criminal convictions, and especially around the area of gun and involved with a gang associated with gun and knife crime.
Yeah, I think there is a real tragedy here with regard to this shooting, but the tragedy is not with Chris Kaba. As far as I'm concerned, he got what he should expect. The tragedy here is with the poor police sergeant who has been run ragged and persecuted by a Crown Prosecution Service who will have known about this gangland man's past, but who nevertheless chose to persecute, to prosecute, to go after a police sergeant doing his duty. And for what? We have no idea, other than the Crown Prosecution Service has decided that signalling political correctness is far more important than justice. Police officers are absolutely sick and tired of being asked to do a job that most of us do not want to do, that most of us could not do. And when they do it, they then find themselves at the wrong end of a criminal investigation. I cannot imagine the hell that sergeant has been through since the shooting. I mean, that's hell enough. Having to take somebody's life is hell enough. Nobody does that lightly. But then to find that the Crown Prosecution Service are putting you on trial for doing your job, for doing your duty. This is the real tragedy as far as I am concerned.
Hey, can I just come back here? I hear what you say. You say he almost sense he got what he deserved. Did he deserve? He didn't deserve to be killed. He deserved to. He deserved to be apprehended by the police in whatever way he could and to face trial. It's not. Perhaps you want to reflect on that.
No, I don't, because what he was doing, he could have given himself up. He was surrounded by police officers, and rather than throwing his hand in the air and saying it's a fair cop gov, what he decided to do was use his police vehicle, was to use his getaway vehicle, an Audi, as a battering ram. And he didn't give a stuff about members of the public or the 10 police officers who were around him. He used that vehicle as a murderous weapon. That left the police sergeant with no other option other than to take a fatal shot. He made his decision when he chose to use that vehicle as a battering ram. Now, let's not forget what happens when we allow the mob to run riots. Let's not forget what happened to Police Constable Keith Blakelock in the 1980s. We have a duty as police officers to intervene where there is a threat to life.
The clock has beaten us. Sorry, that's Harry Miller making his point very firmly. So there's breaking news that Chris Kaba, whose street name is It, was a core member of one of London's most dangerous gangs and was accused of being involved in 2 shootings in less than a week before he was killed by a police marksman. Joining us now is barrister and writer Stephen Barrett. Stephen, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Where do we go from here now? We know the awful history, the criminal history of Chris Kaba. What does this mean for the police officer involved in this case?
Well, just so that listeners and viewers know, there is a lengthy document that you can Google called Reporting Restrictions in the Criminal Courts. It's published by the government and it's in its 5th edition. The overall tone is that courts really should be public, and they're trying to be public, and they don't like putting reporting restrictions in place. We've heard this morning that the family wanted the restrictions to carry on. I think the judge has quite rightly decided that that would be inappropriate. One of the things that they look at when they put restrictions in place is there an absolute need? Is there a real need here? And clearly the judge felt that it really could have swayed the jury if they knew all of this. And it's important that the jury isn't swayed by things that are not connected with the event. But the second thing they look at is how long they last. And I was just glancing through the document, and it even states quite categorically that if reporting restrictions last too long, then they're inherently bad reporting restrictions. So I think the judge has made, the absolute right call on this. It's good for the public to know. It's clearly because we're all bystanders in this, watching it. The jury got all the actual detail, and the jury has made its finding, and we should support and uphold the court process. But those of us who are mere bystanders, we also need to know this stuff. And if you think about that, the officer involved, what it turns out they knew. So Kaba's got some previous convictions. Kaba's involved in some stuff, but they knew that car specifically was tied with at least 3 firearms offences in the months before. So they knew that car was sort of a threat in a way, and that's quite an important thing for us to all take on board. I mean, imagine you don't know who's driving it, but you know that the car is linked to. It was used as a getaway vehicle in a shooting.
Stephen, what we also know is that the car, while there was no gun in the car, we know that Kaba was using the car as a battering ram. He was using it potentially to kill or at least maim or disable those police officers, which is why the marksman took that decision. He had to act for the safety of his colleagues.
Yes. Now, the jury clearly took their job seriously because they took 3 hours to do it. But that's also pretty quick for a verdict to come in. And it's probably because when you look at where the officer was standing, he's obviously quite a lot of risk if that car suddenly moves forward. And cars can be used as weapons. We see them used in terrorist incidents. That's why we've got bollards all over London, because the vehicles are dangerous weapons. And I suspect that's really, I mean, we never know with juries, but I suspect that that would have weighed heavily on their mind. That officer looks to be in quite a lot of risk. I've never served in the military or fired a weapon or been involved in violence. I have friends who have, and they're often sort of traumatized by the process, or just it changes them in a way. And the officers, I think the firearms officers, have called for military-style tribunals rather than civil, than criminal courts, and that's because they feel that they should be tried by their peers, which is quite a tradition of justice.
Yeah.
That they should be tried by people who understand what it is to hold a gun and to risk taking a life.
Stephen, sorry, but surely there are important questions for the CPS to answer over this one. They had the full facts. They had Chris Kaba's criminal past. They knew what was happening on the night. Why did this case go ahead to trial?
Well, in theory, the CPS act as a great filter to stop cases which are against the public interest. I think that it's quite obvious from certain statements by certain politicians that there was a deep political interest in this case. Quite why that was is not clear. And maybe we would be better spent, rather than investigating this officer, maybe public resources would be better spent investigating quite the role that the politicians played in the CPS decision to prosecute. Because is this in the public interest? You do have to ask these questions. And if we're getting political interference in criminal processes, which, by the way, I mean, I don't think that's an outrageous thing to suggest. I'm only suggesting it, but I don't think it's an outrageous thing to suggest, because as far as I'm concerned, this government bragged about interfering in the riot prosecutions.
Yeah, they did.